look at our Jingle gems. Now, I'm only going to show you one of the gems because they're all done exactly the same way, so there's no need for you to sit and watch me hand stitch all of the gems. I've picked one of the larger ones to show you because it's easier to show you on a larger one. This isn't the biggest, this is the second from biggest. So what I've done is I have cut my piece of card, and I've cut that from a Weetabix box. So we're not talking about anything fancy. This isn't going to take anything that you don't have already at home. So any sort of stiff card, if you're a crafter or a sort of a paper worker, then you'll have stiff card. Anyway, the one thing I will say is if you're going to use lighter colour fabrics, make sure that you have this, the side with the print on the inside. I've got a darkish fabric, so it won't show, so it's not a big drama. So I've cut my piece of card to the size that, let me just check it is the right size, just now I've said it, to the size that, yep, that's 9 by 3. So the size that the template shows you. I'm just going to turn that around so it's actually the right angle for me. So I'm going to do one line now, mark a line that is 3 inches in from one end, and then another line that is 3 inches in from the other end. So I've now created thirds. Then from this corner to that point where I split this into thirds, I'm going to make a diagonal. I'm going to do the same thing in that center square, and then the same thing in the end square. So what I've ended up with is effectively 3 squares, each of which has got this diagonal. So I've got a sort of a zigzag going on. All of those measurements and markings are on the templates, so you don't need to worry too much about which fits with which. Just look at each one as you go and you'll figure it out. It's very, very simple. You're dividing the entire rectangle into thirds, so if this is 3 inches by 9 inches, each of these lines that go up are 3 inches along, and then the triangles just go from there. Now you're going to need an awl, because now what we're going to do, having marked those lines, and if you feel confident you don't actually need to even mark them, you can just score them, is use an awl to score those lines, and that will allow us to get nice sharp folds. Now you're scoring, you're not trying to cut through, so don't press so hard that you literally drag up the card. I tend to use the sort of the side of the point on my awl rather than the point, if you like. The point, does that make sense? So I'm kind of pressing down with the side of the point to score. And while I'm a great fan of doing most things freehand, this is something I don't do freehand. So having scored them, you can just bend them slightly. You don't need to fold them properly at this point. Just give them a little bend so that you know that they're going to do what you want them to do. And then you need your piece of fabric. Now, your piece of fabric needs to be approximately 1/2 inch bigger on all dimensions. So this is 9 by 3, so this is 4 by 10 or thereabouts. It's probably not accurately measured. It's not accurately measured, but it isn't far off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my famous glue stick, and I'm just going to pop a little drop of and any glue stick will work, or you could even use Fabri-Tac if you really wanted to, if you don't have a glue stick. I think most of us have something like this in the house. It doesn't have to be a named brand, it can be any variety. And with our fabric right sides down, so the design is underneath, I'm going to stick my piece of card more or less centrally onto onto my fabric. And that's a bit wonky. You can wiggle it about a bit to get it right. It doesn't have to be spot on. What you need to make sure is that you don't have any wrinkles in your fabric. So just turn it over and give it a flatten out with your fingers just to make sure that you don't get any kind of creases or wrinkles. That's all good. Now, more glue stick. I'm going to pop a little drop of glue in the corner, and I'm going to fold the corner in to create a 45-degree angle or thereabouts. We're not measuring, we're not getting protractors out to make sure that it's a 45-degree angle, and we're going to do that on all 4 corners. And remember, we're doing the exact same process with each size of the gems. So now all 4 corners have been folded in, and you can see that. Now I'm going to pop some glue along the long sides, and I'm going over those corners as well because I want the corners to stay in, and I'm just going to fold the sides in. I do this one at a time. If I put glue on all 4 sides, I end up with glue everywhere. And I'm pulling my fabric so that it's nice and taut around that card template that we've got. And again, on the other long side. Again, you could use Fabri-Tac if you find it easier. I just, Fabri-Tac is designed for fabrics, not for card really. So Pritt stick or one of those sort of preparatory glue sticks will do the trick. You could use Copydex, Yoo-hoo, whatever you've got really. You could even do double-sided tape if you really wanted to, but we all know that I try and avoid that stuff if I can. So having done the 2 long sides, we're just going to do the short ends in exactly the same way. And if you fold them in carefully, what you should end up with is a fairly nice right angle at the corners. You don't want it too bunchy at the corners. You can pop your glue away. Now, if you're like me, I usually have to go and wash my hands because I usually get glue all over myself. Actually, I've managed to keep myself fairly tidy this time. So that's our fabric attached to our template. And remember, we started to fold this before. We're now going to make those folds a little more defined. Each one just giving it a little press. I literally just go from one end to the other. Just and then you can hold this, and if you start to fold both ends in, you will see that it starts to form a gem shape. Now, you can't clip these, you have to just kind of hold them, and actually it depends how big your hands are, depends on how easy that is, but you can see there we already have our gem shape. Now I'm just going to grab a self-threading needle and some matching thread. And I always use self-threading needles because I just like them. You can use any needle that you like. And I'm going to going to remove that because then you can see better, because it's not on a dark background. So I've made a little knot in the end, and this is where you kind of feel like you almost need an extra hand. But if you fold it to the shape that it's going to be and then kind of hold it in your hand, you'll find that they actually sit quite easily in your hand. Now your first stitch, you need to just open up and make sure that your stitch is coming from the inside out so that your knot stays within the inside of your gem. And then all we're going to do is, I'm just going to use a whip stitch. If you want to use a ladder stitch, you can do. And we're just going to literally catch the very edges of that fabric. And where this has got gold on it, it's actually really tough to get my needle through. And we're going to stitch all of those edges together to create one solid shape. It's worth taking a little bit of time to make sure that your stitching's neat, even if you're only using using a self-coloured thread. You still want neat stitching, and you're literally just catching just a few threads on both sides. This is really therapeutic. I'm not a fan of hand stitching at the best of times, and I do tend to avoid it if I possibly can, because I'm not the neatest of hand stitchers. But it is quite therapeutic, and these just are so pretty once they're all done. It's worth the effort. Now, you don't have to do all of them. You could just do a few and make a shorter run. You could do them all the same size if you wanted to. You could do individual ones, and look at that, pattern matching. Golly, I couldn't do that if I tried. You could do individual ones and hang them on your tree as individual decorations. I do find I have to constantly be kind of fiddling just to make sure that I've got it all sitting as it should do. And it does take me a little while to do, because we pull it quite tightly around the cardboard. You don't have a lot of fabric to actually stitch through, and you are just catching the almost like the individual fibres on the very sides of your fabric. So this fabric's got gold on it, which actually means that it's difficult to actually pick off the fibres. It's easy enough to stitch through the green bit. It's the gold bit that's the problem. Just do tiny little stitches. You don't have to, not big stitches. You want them to kind of disappear. I know hand stitching isn't for everybody. If you've got arthritic hands, you may want to do one a day rather than doing the whole shebang all in one day, just to give your hands a little break. Sorry, I go quiet when I'm concentrating. It's the only time I do go quiet, to be fair. How many of you have got your Christmas decorations up already? You probably figured that I don't film these at the time. We're not quite in December yet, but a lot of the people in my road have got their decos up already. I'm struggling to find the Christmas spirit, to be honest. I'm sure once I do, it'll look like Santa's grotto in my house, as it always does. But I plan on hanging quite a lot of these because I just think they're really cool. So I've come to the end there, and I can start on that next open side. You find once you've actually stitched them, they become really robust, really solid, because they kind of self-support. Each side supports the other, so once they're actually fixed together, they're really quite tough. But they're also very light, so you can hang them from your Christmas tree should you need to. And I'm hoping you can still see me because I've kind of got it pushed up against my bosom, because that's how I tend to do my hand sewing. So once you get into a rhythm, it kind of goes quite easily. It's that getting into a rhythm thing that's the thing. Whilst I'm not a massive hand stitcher, I've done a fair bit of paper piecing, and I can remember my mother saying to me you needed to have a minimum of, of 15 stitches per inch, and I think that's probably much the same as I'm doing here. So that gives you kind of an indication of how close the stitching is. They're tiny, tiny stitches because they are just catching the fibres on the edges of the two pieces that I'm joining together. Because you can't catch any more than that because you've got cardboard inside, so you're literally just grabbing those little bits on the sides. Now, if you wanted to, you could kind of embellish these once they're made. If you made them with plain fabric, you could add glitter and sparkle and all manner of lovely stuff if you happen to be a glitter and sparkle person. I'm very much for traditional Christmas colours, so I'm sort of a red, green and gold girl for Christmas. I love those sort of traditional Christmas colours, and I do think that the idea of having something like a black Christmas tree is quite bizarre. My Christmas tree is green. But you see them in all colours in the shops these days. Even upside down ones, or ones that can be suspended from the ceiling. What's that about? I suppose if you've got small children or a lack of room, then that's probably a good idea, but I like my Christmas tree standing out of a pot the same way as most Christmas trees do, or with a skirt around the bottom, and preferably green. We're all looking forward to a bit of festivity this year, aren't we? We've had a bit of a grim year. So I'm just going to keep on wittering and stitching until I get right to the very end, and there is still one more side to go, so you're going to have to listen to me witter for a little bit. So each of the gems has a template, and the folds and markings are marked on the template, so you should find it fairly easy to do. They're all done in exactly the same fashion. The little one can be a bit fiddly because it is quite little, And the big one, which is the size up from this, can also be quite fiddly if you've got small hands, because keeping hold of it, there's no way to clip them in place. You have to kind of hold them in your hands. And if you've got tiny hands, holding onto the big one can be quite fiddly because they tend to burst open. But don't worry, you'll do it. Oops, my thread's come off my needle. And if you've measured accurately and done your folds and the scoring accurately, this should fit together perfectly. They should all fit together perfectly. Accuracy is key, as I seem to say all the time. And it does make a difference if you overstretch by a couple of millimeters or an eighth of an inch or whatever. It won't fit together properly, and you'll end up with gaps at the corners, which don't look good. You see, they don't actually take that long to do. We're just heading up towards that last little bit of that last corner. So I'm just going to do a couple of stitches. I'm just going to go through my stitch just to secure it. And then I can trim off my thread. And there you have a perfect little gem. And as I say, they're quite robust. I mean, that wasn't very thick cardboard, but they're quite robust once they're made. And you can see that they have a sort of an obvious top and bottom. Cool, aren't they? They're like little diamonds. And then we're just going to hang them, and I'll come back and show you how to join them together with a little bit of beading and some threads. And I just think they're beautiful.